Hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of Cut Rate Commander, the series in which we take a look at low-price commanders and make budget decks with them. My name is Grazzet, and today we'll be looking at the Angelic Judge of Souls, Firja, Judge of Valor. Before we continue, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe if you like this content and would like me to continue making more videos like this in the future. Also, be sure to stick around until the end of the video to see what 3 commanders you can vote for in the comments for an upcoming episode. With that out of the way, let's start by taking a look at the commander and playstyle. Firja, Judge of Valor is a 2/4 Angel Cleric that costs 2, a white, and 2 black, with flying and lifelink that reads, whenever you cast your second spell each turn, look at the top 3 cards of your library. Put one of them in your hand and the rest in your graveyard. 5 CMC is a high price to pay for a 2/4 body, even with relevant keywords, but Firja's card draw and mill ability is what opens up some interesting ways to build around her. Effectively, whenever we cast our second spell each turn, Firja gives us a free copy of Ransack the Lab, allowing us to pick a card from the top 3 of the deck and dump the rest, which occurs even if the spells fail to resolve. This gives us a nice framework for a Reanimator deck, giving us a consistent means of dumping big creatures into our graveyard and putting reanimation spells into our hand. And to further enable this strategy, we'll be running other cards that allow us to mill ourselves or pitch cards from our hand to the grave in order to load up our graveyard even further. Finally, in keeping with Kaldheim's aesthetic, our reanimation targets of choice will be angels, who not only have decently sized evasive bodies, but a plethora of abilities that help them stay alive, continue on the reanimation plan, provide utility, or just hit really hard. This will leave us with a resilient, grindy deck that can consistently recur its resources and outlast our opponents while simultaneously hitting like a truck thanks to our host of angels. So now that we know a bit about the commander and the deck's playstyle, let's start breaking down the deck itself by starting with the creatures. The CMC 1 slot sees only a single member with Giant Killer, a 1/2 that we can pay 1 and a white and tap to tap down another creature. We also have the option to cast it for its adventure half for 2 and a white to destroy a creature with power 4 or greater. This makes it a decent removal and disruption tool that works well with our commander, as we can cast both the adventure side and creature side for a total of 4 mana, each counting as their own spell to trigger Firja's ability. Continuing to the CMC 2 slot, we have Milliken and Order of Midnight. Milliken is a 0/1 that taps for a colorless and mills us for 1 when it does so, giving us a mana dork that fills up our graveyard as a bonus. Order of Midnight is another adventure card whose creature side is a 2/2 flyer that can't block and whose adventure side returns a creature from grave to hand for 1 and a black, giving us some more 2-for-1 spell goodness and recursion. Moving into the CMC 3 slot, we have our first lineup of angels and angel support with Renegade Reaper, Righteous Valkyrie, and Starheim Aspirant. Renegade Reaper is a 2/3 flyer that mills us for 4 when it ETBs and gains us 4 life if one of the milled cards was an angel, giving us some more graveyard setup and life gain as a bonus. Righteous Valkyrie is a 2/4 flyer that gains us life whenever another angel or cleric ETBs equal to that creature's toughness, and pumps all our creatures by +2/+2 when we have 7 or more life than our starting total, giving us some extra life as we play and reanimate our host, and eventually pumping them if our life total gets high enough. Starheim Aspirant is a 2/2 non-angel that reduces the cost of all angels by 2, making it an amazing piece of cost reduction when we need to hardcast our angels, which will happen well before curve if she sticks around. Some more non-angels bring up the latter half of this slot with Stinkweed Imp, Murderous Rider, and Burnished Heart. Stinkweed Imp is a 1/2 flyer with effectively Death Touch and Dredge 5, making it a potent self-mill piece once it hits the grave by milling 5 instead of drawing to bring it back to hand during our draw step. Murderous Rider is our final adventure card, whose creature side is a 2/3 lifelinker that shuffles back into the deck after it dies, and whose adventure side destroys a creature or planeswalker at the cost of 1 and double black, as well as 2 life, making it another 2-for-1 spell that serves as good removal and serviceable creature. Burnished Heart is a 2/2 that we can pay 3 and sack to search our deck for 2 basic lands and put them into play tapped, giving a decent piece of ramp on a creature that we can reoccur for further ramp as needed. The CMC 4 slot and onward sees nothing but angels as we start off with Vengeful Reaper, Eradicator Valkyrie, and Seraph of the Scales. Vengeful Reaper is a 2/3 flyer with Death Touch and Haste that can be foretold for 1 and a black, giving us a relatively cheap defensive creature if foretold that helps trigger our commander. Eradicator Valkyrie is a 4/3 flyer with lifelink and hexproof from planeswalkers that can boast for 1 and a black, letting us sack a creature when it attacks to force our opponents to do the same, providing us with an edict effect and a sack outlet for creatures that we want to reoccur later. Seraph of the Scales is another 4/3 flyer that we can tap a white to grant Vigilance or a black to grant Death Touch, and has Afterlife for 2, leaving behind 2 1/1 flying spirits when it dies, making it useful for us offensively and defensively while leaving behind bodies when it's removed. In the final place in this slot, we have Angel of Finality, a 3/4 flyer that exiles target player's graveyard when it ETBs for some nice graveyard hate on a decently sized evasive body that we can reanimate as needed to keep our opponent's graveyards empty. Some White Angels join us next in the CMC 5 slot with Herald of War, Angel of Sanctions, and Baneslayer Angel. Herald of War is a 3/3 flyer that gains a +1/+1 counter whenever it attacks and reduces the cost of any humans or angels we play by 1 for each +1/+1 counter on it, giving us an ever-growing body that makes the rest of our host easier to cast. Angel of Sanctions is a 3/4 flyer that can be embalmed for 5 and a white that exiles an opponent's non-land permanent when it ETBs until it leaves the battlefield, giving us some serviceable spot removal that can come back from the grave without the need of a reanimation spell, though it does exile itself if it does this. Baneslayer Angel is a 5/5 flyer with first strike, lifelink, and protection from dragons and demons, which serves as a big evasive beater to swing at our opponent's faces, dealing nicely with blockers and healing us to boot. The last angel in this slot is Cleaving Reaper, a 5/3 flyer with trample that we can pay 3 life to return to hand from the grave whenever another angel or berserker ETBs, for a recurable offensive threat that our opponents will have to deal with over and over again. CMC 6 starts us off with some protection and reanimation with Deathless Angel, Adakar Valkyrie, and Dawnbreak Reclaimer. Deathless Angel is a 5/7 flyer that we can pay 2 white to make target creature indestructible until end of turn, for some potent protection distribution on a big evasive body. Adakar Valkyrie is a 4/5 flyer that we can tap to return target creature to play if it dies until the end of the turn, granting us another form of protection that works well with ETB triggers. Dawnbreak Reclaimer is a 5/5 flyer that on our end step has us pick a creature from an opponent's graveyard and has that opponent pick a creature from ours, bringing both back to the battlefield if we choose. A Sun Titan adjacent effect that works well with our big creatures and still works even if the targeted opponent has no creatures in their grave. The latter half of this slot brings us Angelic Skirmisher, Valkyrie Harbinger, and Sunblast Angel. Angelic Skirmisher is a 4/4 flyer that, who at the beginning of each combat phase, has us choose either First Strike, Vigilance, or Lifelink, and gives that keyword to all our creatures until the end of the turn, providing our host with a selection of powerful keywords to choose from on both our and our opponent's combat phases. Valkyrie Harbinger is a 4/5 flyer with lifelink that creates a 4/4 angel with flying and vigilance on our end step if we've gained 4 or more life this turn, a condition we can easily fulfill in this deck with the life gain we have to get more bodies on board. Sunblast Angel is another 4/5 flyer that destroys all tapped creatures when it ETBs, giving us a one-sided board wipe if our opponents are being overly aggressive. The CMC 7 slot adds more to the host with Emiria Shepard, Angel of Serenity, and Saphara Sky's Blade. Emiria Shepard is a 4/4 flyer with a landfall trigger that returns a non-land permanent from the grave to our hand whenever we play a land, or back to the field when we play a plains, giving us some powerful recursion and reanimation as we make our land drops per turn. Angel of Serenity is a 5/6 flyer that exiles up to 3 creatures from the field or from the grave when it ETBs, returning those creatures to their owner's hands when it dies, serving both as a removal and recursion piece for us with a big evasive body. Speaking of big, Saphara is a 7/7 flyer with lifelink that can be cast for a single white if we tap 4 flyers and grants all of our other flyers indestructible, giving us a massive evasive stat line with powerful AoE indestructibility to protect our board. Last in this slot is Angel of Despair, a 5/5 flyer that destroys a permanent when it ETBs, giving us some nice spot removal that we can reoccur from the grave easily to use over and over again. The CMC 8 slot sees only a single member with a Chroma Angel of Wrath, a 6/6 with flying, first strike, vigilance, trample, haste, and protection from black and red, granting us another angel with a bunch of keywords and protection from relevant colors to smash into our opponent's boards. Finally, in the CMC 9 slot, we see the last member of the host with Rhea Dawnbringer, a 4/6 flyer that returns a creature from our grave to play on every upkeep, giving us a free reanimation every turn to keep bringing our angels back to play from the grave. That's all the creatures covered, so let's move on to our instance. A pair of draw cards leads us off in the CMC 1 slot with Village Rites and Skeletal Scrying. Village Rites has us sack a creature to draw 2 cards, letting us use our smaller creatures for card advantage or our ETB creatures to be reanimated again later. Skeletal Scrying is an X spell that has us exile X cards from our graveyard to draw X cards and lose X life, making use of the non-creatures we mill by turning them into card draw. The CMC 2 slot then gives us some removal options with Despark and Final Payment. Despark exiles any permanent that's CMC 4 or more, providing us with a flexible removal option to deal with higher CMC threats. Final Payment has us either pay 5 life or sack a creature or enchantment to destroy another creature, giving us instant speed creature removal at the cost of life for creatures, both of which we have in spades. The CMC 3 slot sees even more removal with Mortify and Generous Gift. Mortify simply destroys a creature or enchantment, while Generous Gift destroys any permanent at the cost of giving its owner a 3/3 token, making them both flexible removal spells to deal with a variety of threats. Lastly, in the CMC 4 slot, we have Price of Fame, which lets us destroy a creature and surveil for 2, while costing 2 less if the target is a legendary creature, making it often cost only 1 and a black to cast when targeting commanders, and helps us set up our graveyard. That's all our instants covered, so let's move on to our sorceries. Skipping to the CMC 2 slot, we have some card draw with Sign in Blood and Ransack the Lab. Sign in Blood has target player draw 2 and lose 2 life, making it a cheap draw spell that can occasionally close out a game for us by shocking someone for 2. Ransack the Lab lets us look at the top 3 cards of our deck, putting 1 into our hand and the rest of the grave, giving us our commander's ability on a spell which we will happily take for the draw and graveyard setup. The CMC 3 slot sees even more card draw with Funeral Rites and Read the Bones. Funeral Rites has us draw 2, mill 2, and then take 2 damage, while Read the Bones has us scry 2, draw 2, and take 2 damage, both providing decent card draw in our colors along with graveyard setup and card selection respectively. Last in this slot, we run Victimize, which has us sack a creature to bring 2 others back from the grave tapped, making it a great 2-for-1 deal on reanimation spells that we'll happily run. The CMC 4 slot sees our last 2 draw spells with Siphon Mind and Ambition's Cost. Siphon Mind has all other players discard a card, and we draw a card for every card discarded this way, often drawing us 3 cards and denying our opponent's resources. Ambition's Cost simply has us draw 3 cards and take 3 damage, making it a straightforward but effective draw spell for us. Next up, we have some board wipes with Crippling Fear and Divine Reckoning. Crippling Fear has us name a creature type, and all creatures that are not that creature type gain -3/-3 until end of turn, making it a good removal option for smaller creatures that completely ignores our angels. Divine Reckoning has each player select 1 creature and destroy the rest, and has flashback for 5 and 2 white, making it a board wipe we can play twice if from hand or once from the grave if we happen to mill it. Last in the slot, we're running Dread Return, which reanimates a creature and can be flashed back from the grave by sacking 3 creatures, making it a good recurable reanimation spell for us if we happen to have the spare bodies around. More reanimations come up in the CMC 5 slot with Unburial Rites, Beacon of Unrest, and Defy Death. All 3 bring creatures back from the grave to the field, with Unburial Rites having flashback for 3 and a white to be played again from the grave, Beacon of Unrest shuffling itself back in the deck to be used again later, and Defy Death putting 2 +1/+1 counters on the reanimated creature if it happens to be an angel for extra punching power. All 3 are good reanimation spells with upside, which is what we like to see. The CMC 6 slot sees even more reanimation with Ever After and Haunted Voyage. Ever After reanimates 2 creatures and sends itself back to the bottom of the deck to potentially be used again, while Haunted Voyage does the same but only with creatures of the same type, and can also be foretold for 5 and 2 black to bring all angels back from our grave to play for some mass reanimation goodness. Finally, we have our last sorcery with Austere Command, which lets us choose 2 of the following options: destroy all creatures with CMC 3 or less, destroy all creatures with CMC 4 or greater, destroy all artifacts, or destroy all enchantments, giving us a very flexible board wipe we can custom tailor to fit our needs on any board state. That's all our sorceries done, so let's move on to our enchantments. Skipping right to the CMC 2 slot, we have Tortured Existence, which we can pay a black to send a creature from our hand to the grave and bring another creature from grave back to hand, giving us some nice recursion for some of our utility creatures while letting us dump our bigger angels to the grave to be reanimated. Then we skip again to the CMC 5 slot for our last enchantment, Elspeth Conquers Death. A saga whose first chapter exiles a permanent of CMC 3 or greater, its second chapter making all non-creature spells cast by our opponents cost 2 more until the start of our next turn, and whose last chapter reanimates a creature planeswalker from our grave with an extra +1/+1 counter or loyalty respectively. This makes it serve both as reanimation and removal, so we'll happily run it. That's all our enchantments covered, so let's start looking at our artifacts. It's mana rocks all the way down this time around, starting with Soul Ring in the CMC 1 slot, which taps for 2 colorless. As usual, it's the best mana rock in the game, which is why we're running it. Quickly running down all our CMC 2 rocks, we're running Arcane Signet, which taps for 1 mana in our commander's color identity, Orzhov Signet, which we can pay 1 and tap for both of our colors, Talisman of Hierarchy, which either taps for a colorless, or we can have it tap for either one of our colors by having it deal 1 damage to us, Charcoal and Marble Diamond, both of which come into play tapped and tap for a black and white respectively, Mind Stone, which taps for colorless and we can pay 1 and sack to draw a card, and finally Prismatic Lens, which taps for colorless and we can pay 1 to produce a mana of any color. That's all our mana rocks, artifacts covered, so let's start taking a look at our planeswalkers. Only one planeswalker joins us in the CMC 4 slot, that being Sorin, Vengeful Bloodlord. Sorin comes into play with 4 loyalty and has a static ability to grant all our creatures and planeswalkers lifelink so long as it's our turn. His +2 loyalty ability deals 1 damage to a player, and his -X loyalty ability reanimates a creature equal to the amount of loyalty counters removed, making him a good source of life gain and reanimation so long as he isn't dealt with. That's our planeswalker covered, so let's start looking at our land base. Quickly running down our mana lands, we have Command Tower, which taps for any color in our commander's color identity. Caves of Kolos, which taps for a colorless or either of our colors instead if we take a damage. Orzhov Basilica, which comes into play tapped, bounces one of our lands back to hand and taps for both of our colors. Tainted Field, which taps for a colorless or either of our colors if we control a swamp. Temple of Silence, which comes into play tapped, taps for either of our colors and scries when it ETBs. Myriad Landscape, which taps for a colorless, comes into play tapped, and we can pay 2 and sack to put 2 of the same basic land from our deck into play tapped. And finally, Evolving Wilds and Terramorphic Expanse, both which can be tapped and sacked to find a basic land from our deck and put it into play tapped. For utility lands, we're running Bojuka Bog, Mortuary Mire, and Memorial to Folly. Bojuka Bog comes into play tapped, taps for a black, and exiles target opponent's graveyard when it ETBs, giving us some good graveyard hate on a land. Mortuary Mire and Memorial to Folly both come into play tapped and tap for a black, with Mortuary Mire returning a creature from the grave to the top of our deck when it ETBs, and Memorial to Folly returning the creature to hand by paying 2 and a black, sacking it and tapping it, both giving us some decent recursion on our land base. Our last 2 utility lands are Ghost Quarter and Great Hall of Starnheim. Ghost Quarter taps for a colorless, and we can tap it and sack it to destroy target land, giving its controller a basic from their deck to replace it, making it a good source of spot removal for our opponent's utility lands. Great Hall of Starnheim comes into play tapped, taps for a black, and we can pay 2 white and a black and tap it and sack it to create a 4/4 angel token with flying and vigilance at sorcery speed, giving us the option to create a decently sized evasive body in a land if we need it. Lastly, we're running 12 plains and 11 swamps as our basics to fill out our land base. So now that we've looked at all the cards in our deck, let's take a look at this deck's breakdown. This deck currently has 30 creatures including the commander, 7 instants, 16 sorceries, 2 enchantments, 8 artifacts, 1 planeswalker, and 36 lands. Looking at the stats that matter to our game plan, we have 24 angels or cards with the ability to make angel tokens, 6 cards that care about angels, 14 reanimation sources, 6 recursion sources, and 7 mill/discard sources. This gives us a large amount of angels and cards that care about angels, alongside a decent number of ways to get them into our yard to reanimate or bring them back to hand as needed. For general deck stats, we have 11 ramp sources, 10 card draw sources, 13 targeted removal sources, and 4 board wipes, making this about as standardized as one can want for a commander deck, with plenty of ramp, draw, and ways to remove specific threats or clear the board as needed. Looking at our mana curve, we have 5 1-drops, 13 2-drops, 11 3-drops, 11 4-drops, 9 5-drops, 9 6-drops, 4 7-drops, 1 8-drop, and 1 9-drop, giving us a mid to late game curve that is actually a bit faster than it looks thanks to us reanimating higher mana creatures earlier in the game. Currently, this deck is valued at $62.76, not counting the price of basic lands or shipping. This price was calculated by using the cheapest listed marketplace price on TCG Player at the time of this recording. For some side grades, if we want more angel payoffs, we can add Firja's Retribution for the extra body removal and AoE double strike for our angels, or Rampage of the Valkyries for another token and Dictate of Erebos-like effect when our angels die. More self-mill is also viable, with Corpse Churn milling us for 3 and bringing a creature from our grave back to hand, Golgari Thug with Dredge 4 on Recursion, and finally Final Parting to tutor any one card to our hand from our deck and another one to the grave. Lastly, more reanimation spells could also be added, with Animate Dead and Stitch Together being nice cheap reanimate spells, though Stitch Together may take some setup, while Miraculous Recovery is a reanimation at instant speed, which is rarely seen. For upgrades, we can add more big angels like Lyra Dawnbringer, Avacyn Angel of Hope, and Archangel of Thune for the utility and power they bring to the table, as well as more efficient removal such as Anguished Unmaking, or the board wipe Living Death, which doubles up as a mass reanimation piece as well. Thanks everyone for sticking around until the end of the video. As per the votes in the comments, the next Cut Rate Commander episode will be featuring Svella, Ice Shaper, as voted by Pablo Castillo, Erasmus Anderson, and Jari Huso. Also, since Strixhaven will be out by the time the Svella video drops, I'm going to be clearing the board of the commanders and setting a new set in order to vote on, those being Killian Ink Duelist, Quintorius Field Historian, and Dina Soul Steeper. So please let me know in the comments below on which of these 3 you'd like to see an upcoming video on. And with that, have a good one folks, and stay safe.